My name's Tingley, and I was recently appointed Edmonton's first historian laureate, the first in Canada, and I think that's a tribute to the city of Edmonton for recognizing the importance of history to the cultural life of the city. I've also been a historian, a researcher, and a historical resource consultant in the city of Edmonton since 1973. And since 1990, I've been writing a number of books about the history of Edmonton. So I'm fairly deeply immersed in the history of my city. And so I think that that's one reason I was particularly attracted to the prospect of working on this project. The postcard collection at the University of Alberta libraries goes very deep. There's over 22,000 postcards, and that number is growing as the collection grows. So in this exhibition, I was able to select a fairly good representation of thematic concerns on the history of the prairie provinces and find hundreds and hundreds of very good images to illustrate the ideas that I had in connection with those themes. So if, for example, you were looking at changing attitudes towards certain ethnic groups, you can find that represented in this collection, because ultimately this is a popular culture manifestation, and it represents widely held ideas because people were buying these images, and while some of them may not be considered politically correct today, they were quite acceptable, unfortunately, in their day. So presenting some of these images or retaining them does not in any way endorse the views, but at the same time it's very important to remember that those views did exist at one time. So there's just two concepts, I think, that indicate how this collection can be used, and there are many others. I found all of the postcards fascinating to look at. Towards the end of the project, the quality of the imagery was such that I think they're all very interesting. I selected photographs that had people in them, and there were a lot of very interesting ones of important buildings or important activities, important places. But what distinguished that image from the one I would choose is the ones with parades or ceremonies or picnics, people doing things. While it's a great source for agricultural equipment, what I wanted was the harvest crews taking a break, having something to eat, something that just casts some light on what the people themselves were doing and what life was like. What I wanted was a glimpse of what life was like, so you had a little bit more of a feeling of, well, if you woke up in 1900, walked down the street, what sorts of things would you be seeing? And those were the ones I found really interesting. Using 100 postcards out of 23,000 postcards was a function of the manageability for the team in creating this exhibition. So in a sense, it was an arbitrary number that was arrived at and caused a certain amount of headache over time, because when you're going through the 22,000 postcards, it's fairly clear which ones are in and out for the purposes of this particular kind of exhibition, and then you go through the next 10,000, and then you go through the next 500. Then it starts getting really difficult. And when we got it down to the end, it was quite painful, because there were a lot of excellent images that had to be left out. This was an exhibition about the prairie provinces, so there was some effort made to be balanced as well. With the three prairie provinces, the capital cities, if we had Regina in, we felt that it was incumbent on us that we have Edmonton as well, and Winnipeg. So in a addition to that, we had to have a sufficient number of themes covered in this exhibit to do justice to what the collection was capable of doing. So when you get down to it, there's only a room for maybe one or two of the very best of the best for each theme in each province. And that's out of 22,000. So that was a rigorous selection process. And the 100, believe me, I would have been happy to have had 10,000 by the end of the project. I think that the fact that you have a large collection makes them more useful, and to some extent the larger the collection, the more useful, because really they are like little core samples from time, little glimpses, as we call it in the exhibition, as though you could just peek through a peephole and see a scene from the past. And these just struck people as important or interesting or quirky at the time. And you never know what's going to be in them. One of the images that we used from Leduc has a kazoo band. And parades and bands, an important theme from community life. But when one of my friends looked at it, he said, "Oh, look, in the background, that was my father's store." And suddenly, there was a whole story about his father's store and who the people were that owned it before. So an image like that can trigger a lot of peripheral and unexpected consequences, as they say, and a very, very suggestive kind of imagery. The fact that the catalogue opens and closes with images of Aboriginal people makes a statement. It's a subliminal statement, but I think it's an important statement, and that is that Aboriginal people were here before the settlement period, which gets the bulk of attention in this exhibit, partly because the golden age of postcards coincides with the peak settlement period. But also having an image at the end indicates that while people during this golden age were looking at Native people as the vanishing Americans, so-called, in the United States, or a vanishing race disappearing tragically, that has fortunately been proven to not be true, and Native people are a very active and vital part of our cultural life still. I have collected postcards in the past, and I think it's just to maintain a sense of your own experience and keep little mementos. The first time I collected postcards was when my family moved to Western Canada from New Brunswick when I was 8. And so I was, having never traveled out of the Maritimes before that, everything was quite exotic, and coming to the West, seeing my first cowboy or my first Indian walking along the road, or somebody on horseback, or someone herding sheep was just great. So any postcards that collected that, I kept them. And there's one postcard in particular in this collection, but not exhibited, although I was tempted to include it in the exhibition, of a Native chief Stoney chief at Banff during Banff Indian days. And that postcard was stuck in the upper corner of my bedroom mirror for about 3 years at Strathern Heights Apartments when I was about 8, 9 in there. And when I saw it, it really brought back some of that feeling that I had, that I was living in the West. I was 8 when we came west, and so I was enthusiastic for everything Western, and that's part of it, is keeping some of the exoticism of places that you're not familiar with. So a lot of these postcards are sent back to people in Europe. Ironically, a lot of them are produced in Europe through using new European technology. Then the images collected here at a time when every little community had a photographer, and very specific sort of images then would be sent back, including pictures of our first house, or here's the hotel room we stayed in with a little X over the hotel window, or here's Uncle Johnny operating the gang plow as we're breaking sod. So it's just a way, like personal photographs, of maintaining that connection with your own experience. The golden age of postcards ended back in the 1930s, 1940s at the latest, I think. And postcards went somewhat into decline with the rise of more people having their own Kodak cameras. Mass culture changed quite radically, certainly after the Second World War. And so you were finding more boilerplate images, less of these specific little images that are so charming and informative for that early period. And you had more images that were just kind of iconic in a bland sort of way, somebody going up Mount Norquay, whatever, on the chairlift. Right now, I think people don't write that much either. Even writing a postcard is kind of too much for a lot of people. So, I mean, they're more into tweeting and things like that. So, I mean, all of these changes in popular culture, mass culture, are seeing the end of postcards, I think. And so we now live in the age of evites, or sending your own images over the internet to people. And I think probably in a few years postcards will become more and more exotic than they are now. I think that the postcard collection is an invaluable and a unique resource. There are thousands of images to choose from. And as the curator, I'm bringing my own selective process to it, my own background, my own historical interests developed from a lifetime of my interests. But I think that there's a resource there for scholars. There's also a resource there for everyone. So if you grew up in Leduc and you go online and you look for these images from Leduc, you will see things there that will pique your interest or suggest further research, family history, anything like that. There's nothing like an image to stir that kind of interest and get people going on their own research. So there's a range of possibilities there. And I'm very glad to see that the university libraries are continuing to add to this collection, because as I said earlier, I believe it seems that the larger the critical mass of material, the more potential for research exists. This is Ken Tingley, and I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to share my enthusiasm for postcards from the golden age of postcards in the last best West.